Welcome back to the Chicagolandians, a casual Chicago sports podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Cunningham, joined by my co-host, Conor Cunningham.
We're two brothers from the Chicagoland area talking about the latest and greatest in Chicago sports news.
Welcome back to another episode of the Chicagolandians. I'm your host, Patrick Cunningham, joined, as always, by Conor Cunningham.
Hello.
In today's episode, we are going to be doing a little pivot away from the Chicago Bears. This is a Chicagolandians first. We're talking about the Chicago White Sox. I think right now with the NFL, the offseason, there's only so much you can talk about. We're only about a week into OTAs. There's still Caleb Williams news that we could probably have made an episode about.
Yeah, deep dive into the bear claw or something, yeah.
Yeah, or the red zone struggles of the offense. Or
bad day 2 of OTAs, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We thought it would be a more fruitful conversation to talk about another area of Chicago sports, which is the Chicago White Sox. For those unfamiliar or uninitiated, the Chicago White Sox currently in 2024 are
15-39.
Yeah, 15-39, projected to be one of the worst teams of all time. But what is interesting is that only 2 years ago, we were in the playoffs and seemed to be, the next hot up-and-coming baseball team, dynasty of the future, and how quickly we have fallen. I think it is an interesting story and an interesting timeline to look at, what went right and what went wrong. Just go over the last probably 15 years of Sox history to see how we've gotten here today.
I will never forget, and I believe it was 2021, driving home and looking at a Bleacher Report power rankings and seeing the White Sox as the number one team in baseball. That is a core memory I feel like that I have of like, wow, the Sox are finally have arrived. And just to be 15-39 now is pretty sad.
Just a quick kind of whet your appetite. 2023, we finished 61-101, which was a worse record than every year of the rebuilding phase. Everywhere from 2010 to 2023, that was the worst year after we had gotten all of our stars. Just a little teaser. Okay, but so getting into it, basic flow of the episode, we're going to go through the years in Sox history, starting from 2008. We're going to cover some notable trades, the general farm system development, and the ups and downs and major milestones leading up to now 2024, the current state of the Chicago White Sox. So for some historical context, we have 2005, which was a time that Connor and I were about 2 years old, so did not have too many core memories.
This is a core memory for me, yeah.
But this was the last time the White Sox won the World Series or would sniff a championship. This is the last time we'd win the World Series, which is something most of Chicago, and I feel like most of sports in general, pretend like didn't happen.
It's kind of been erased from the internet, yeah.
Yeah, seriously, we feel like we're been Men in Black eye scanned thing. But yeah, looking at now, I can't imagine winning a World Series. Can't even imagine winning more than one game in the playoffs. But so 2005 was the last time the Sox won the World Series and by far the deepest run that we would make in the playoffs for the next 20 years.
No deeper run than the World Series.
I mean, that is a good point. That's about as far as you can go.
Winning the World Series.
And 2008 is a notable year because it was the last time the White Sox would make the playoffs until 2020. So following 2009 all the way to 2019 were dark ages of Chicago White Sox and what started the rebuilding phase. To start off, I think it's just important to note 2013 to 2016, some of the notable draft picks that we have. Connor, if you want to hit those.
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like these are some of the cornerstones, not necessarily who led us to the promised land, but kind of led us to just where we are now. Starting with Chris Sale, who I feel like for the majority of the early 10s was the defining ace of the White Sox. So we drafted him with the 13th overall pick, and from the point that we drafted him, I feel like until we traded him eventually to the Red Sox, he was kind of like our one shining moment or one shining star. He'd be like the one all-star that we would get throughout the season. There were some weird points in the Chris Sale era, especially like the jersey debates or the jersey thing that he had. had where he like ripping the sleeves off. But Chris Sale was definitely like our greatest pitcher that we had during this time. And then Jose Quintana, and then Tim Anderson. Those are some of the other prospects that we had. Tim Anderson ended up being like our hottest prospect that we had for a long time. And I remember it being a big deal when we eventually pulled him up. Even though I think he was maybe only the 22nd prospect when he got pulled up, but it was still a big deal. And then Jose Abreu, when he signed him in 2013, I believe that was one of the biggest contracts that had been given to like a foreign player at that time. We signed him for a 6-year, $68 million contract, which is like pretty crazy to sign for a 6-year contract. But that season he won Rookie of the Year, and his season was like freaking awesome. So big contract out of Cuba. His rookie year, I feel like, was just electric. And then the last guy to talk about was Carlos Rodon out of Vanderbilt, I believe. This is this period where I feel like we were just drafting a lot of pitchers, the Kopech era too. But yeah, these are some of the notable acquisitions that we drafted in this area that I feel like would lead us into our rebuilding phase.
Of these draft picks, Chris Sale, Quintana, and then Carlos Rodon would go on to be major trade pieces that would lead to the current rebuild or like the development of the farm system. What was the jersey thing? I don't know about that.
Oh yeah, so do you know the red jerseys that the Sox used to wear?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he like hated those a lot. And then, the ones, I believe the like white ones with the red and blue socks across the middle, he was like cutting up the throwback jerseys like in the dugout, and then they threw him out. Yeah, he got sent home because he was cutting up the throwback jerseys because he hated them so much. So there was like that weird period. But I don't know. That was, I guess that's behind him now. Although I haven't checked up with Chris Sale lately, but
I checked up on him recently. I think he's 2023. He was with the Red Sox. I believe now he is with the Guardians. No, Braves. But yeah. So then moving on from those notable draft picks, the last of those, Carlos Rodon, in 2014. We move on to 2015. The only notable acquisition and move that happened in 2015 was we infamously signed Fernando Tatis Jr., who is now one of the best players in MLB. We signed him for, I believe, it was about $850,000. I'm not sure what that contract looked like, but he's now making hundreds of millions, so that seems like a pretty good deal. And then we quickly traded him to the Padres for James Shields. And James Shields, I believe, now is not making hundreds of millions of dollars, so widely considered not a good move. But, Connor wisely pointed out that that Tatis was about 16 at the time, which again, it's just a theme of baseball. It's just how there's this interesting thing about baseball that I was reading up on. When you compare it to the NFL or the NBA, those prospects are ready to go. You are drafting in the NFL draft. They're juniors and seniors and freshmen in college, and they're developed. They're like 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And you have heard about them for about a year, and then that's it. Once they're drafted, that's it, because now they're in the league. But the MLB, it's like you can get drafted from so many different areas. You can be international players, you can be signed internationally, drafted out of high school, and you can just be heard about for 4 or 5 years before you actually make it to the league. I mean, you got to think there's so many Tatis at 16 that are heralded as this great up-and-coming guy that probably don't pan out, right? So it's probably hard to judge at this moment. Hindsight is 2020, but it's just funny to look back on.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just because like there's so many spots to fill in baseball. Like most organizations have 3 levels of minor league teams to fill, or maybe it's just like the nature of baseball itself. You have a lot of players rotating in and out of teams. But yeah, like players get signed so young, from so far out. Drafts go super deep and draft like random players as well. I was reading up on it, and like Tatis, I feel like was such a lottery ticket for the Padres. It's like if you were to read this trade on ESPN, it'd be like the Sox when we just traded Cease, it'd be like one of the 3 players that you see at the bottom of the trade. Those would be like what Tatis essentially was. It's like a footnote on the trade. So it's pretty incredible that it worked out like that. But I mean, Tatis is currently signed to a 14-year, $340 million contract. So it's like, I feel like it'd be nice if we had Tatis instead of, I guess, the corpse of Tim Anderson before he was traded. But it is what it is. Like other teams would have traded Tatis too. It's not like the Sox are crazy for not seeing the talent in a 16-year-old.
I think I checked the 2022 or 2021 Sox draft class. I am super not tapped into MLB draft, but it looked like we had drafted like 15 players. I don't know how many rounds the MLB draft is. I heard it was just recently televised. I mean, I've never watched it.
Yeah, there's 20 rounds of the MLB draft, which is bananas.
That's bananas. So yeah, you're right. You got so many teams to fill.
I mean, it's tough because you've never seen any of these, like the 2022 draft. I would be hard pressed if a listener could name a single player that was drafted here in the first round, not necessarily Drew Jones, who was drafted second overall, or Jackson Holiday. Like college baseball just isn't televised, and it's not like high school baseball is televised. So I feel like nobody knows any of these prospects besides like a week before when you read a Bleacher Report mock draft. So I feel like there's just not a lot of demand. And then also it goes for 20 rounds, so it goes longer than any other draft. I feel like baseball is just set up in an odd way.
Or like think of Abreu, right? We get him in 2014, and then 6 years later, then like 2020, then he wins the MVP, right? It's like NFL, you're in the league for 6 years. You might be calling it after, if you're like an average player, you might be calling it, right? Or like Jackson Holiday, who was the number one prospect in the first overall 2022. He is still in the minor leagues, and he bumped up to the Orioles for a little bit, but then bumped back down. Jose Abreu is in the minor leagues right now. Like, he was doing bad, so they bumped him down to the minor league. It's just such a different sport. It's very interesting to read about.
Just a trigger warning, just to say that Pat and I enjoy watching baseball games, and Pat and I enjoy following baseball, but Pat and I played baseball up until 5th grade. So just putting it out there that our knowledge of the MLB and baseball is not as strong as the NFL for our listeners out there.
For sure. And I felt like we were both conscious of that when we made this episode, but we took time to at least learn the Sox story, but absolutely some of the details of baseball.
I'm just realizing now I'm saying a lot of stuff that I don't know is true, and like I'm kind of just throwing some stuff out there.
Yeah, for sure. But moving on to 2016 is when we start to really definition rebuild. We have all of our stud players like Chris Sale, Adam Eaton, who are like the two main guys who we start to sell and trade to start building the farm system. So in 2016, we ship Chris Sale off to the Red Sox and acquire Michael Kopech and Yoan Moncada. In 2017, Yoan Moncada would go on to be the number 2 prospect of the top 100 prospects, and Kopech would go on to be the number 16 prospect. We also go on to trade Adam Eaton to the Nationals and acquire Lucas Giolito and Ronaldo Lopez. Also Dane Dunning. Not super familiar with Dane Dunning's career, but more familiar with Lucas Giolito.
Dunning was a solid pitcher. I feel like there was a period where he was a pretty solid contributor for the Sox. I feel like he's the guy who had those sunglasses, or he wore the glasses.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Still in the league, I think. So seems like a solid player. And then also was the debut of Tim Anderson, who, again, we drafted in 2013, and now 2016, 3 years later, he's now making his MLB debut. Just a product of how different the league is compared to the NFL. But 2017 is when we really start to see the power of what we are building, what we are slowly acquiring in our farm system. So 2017 is notable because we were the only team in the MLB to have 3 of the top 20 prospects on the top 100 prospects list. That was led by Yoan Moncada, who, again, we'll highlight, was the number 2 prospect in the MLB. The only one ahead of him, ironically, was Adam Benintendi, who we now have. Lucas Giolito is number 12. Michael Kopech was number 16, and Ronaldo Lopez was 45. We also go on to sign 19-year-old Luis Robert, who certainly right now is our only notable trade piece. Ironically, at the time, Shohei Ohtani was the only higher ranked overseas player. I just thought that was just funny to see. And then we also trade Jose Quintana for Dylan Cease and Eloy Jimenez. It's so funny to see. I'd love to hear you talk about this, but just to see in 3 trades, right? Quintana, Chris Sale, and Adam Eaton, just how many players you can get for one player, and how these 3 trades set us up for what was supposed to be a great future. It's just funny how fast or how much you can trade for.
Yeah. I think baseball is like the biggest sport of team being able to transition to win now, where it's like Quintana being traded, Sale being traded, and all these players being traded to contenders because they have these huge farm systems that they can trade away to help make up for that. Whereas like in the NFL, it's hard to like really make a trade to go to win now. I remember distinctly like this period where like every week I would go on to like MLB.com and look at the top 100 prospects and like count how many we had in the top 100, and like seeing when like Lucas Giolito would slowly move up the rankings, how cool that was. Like you said, Pat, when you see how you can trade a guy like Adam Eaton, who like good outfielder, but like I don't wake up in cold sweats thinking about Adam Eaton. To trade this guy and acquire players like this. Like I feel like it's so interesting. And yeah, these three trades pretty much created the Sox that we know now with like Kopech, Moncada, Giolito, like Eloy and Cease. Like these are like the main players that I feel like we've had for a long time. So
like you said, these three trades, this is like the definition of the Sox for 2019 to 2022 was these core players. So so that's 2017. Moving on to 2018. Oh, so for context, 2017 we go 67 and 95. So still clearly losing more games than we're winning. Definition rebuild, right? I'll highlight again. That is a better record than we finished in 2023 with all of these prospects. 2018, we would get close to 2023's record. We went 62 and 100, but this was when our farm system was ranked number 3 in the MLB, which was, I feel like, unheard of for Sox. And like everything leading up to when we made the playoffs in 2020 was like definition of a perfect rebuild going on. We're losing a ton of games, but we're constructing this amazing farm system. In 2018, we had Eloy Jimenez was ranked as the number 4 prospect. Robert was the number 28, and Dylan Cease was the number 61. Do you remember, Connor, looking at old videos of Eloy Jimenez in the minors or Robert in the minors, just seeing them play?
Yeah, I think it was so funny. I think it was Luis Robert, or yeah, it was one of them where you would look and they're playing. It looks like they're playing on like a field that's 250 feet long, and them like knocking out all the lights in the field, and it's like them just hitting like moon balls on like video that's shot in 480p, and you're like, yo, here's Luis Robert hitting this moon ball, and you're like, holy cow, like I'm so excited. I feel like all these players are like you said at the beginning, they're like so distant from being on the team when it's like watching like Winston-Salem baseball. It's like, how often are you tapping into that? And then all of a sudden they're like on the team. I feel like this period was like the Sox are like sleeping giants. Just wait till everyone gets up and starts playing.
Those early videos of Eloy and Luis, like you said, it was literally looked like someone in the bleachers with a camcorder recording, and every shot was like a 5-second clip. You can't even really tell who's hitting. You don't see the ball, you just hear the sound, and you're just like, wow, this is awesome. This is okay. I guess that guy's good. I'm just thinking how these scouts, I would love to see how MLB scouting works. It must be so hard because you have to look
Everywhere.
literally everywhere, the entire world to find these players. 2019, so again, 2018, we go 62 and 100. Bad. 2019, this. 2019, we go 72 and 89, and this was when people believed this is the rebuild, it was over. And for the next 2 years, it seemed confirmed that, okay, all the prospects have come up and have arrived, and Dark Ages, the suffering for the last 10 years for the Sox is over. We're ready to go. We're a dark horse dynasty that's ready to dominate for the next 10 years. Eloy Jimenez, in his rookie year, hits 31 home runs. Lucas Giolito, who, before his all-star run, Lucas Giolito was trash, and then made some changes to his pitching and became an all-star. Tim Anderson goes on to win the batting title. A theme you'll see with the Sox is our failure to develop prospects, or like once they come into the league, they don't really get better. But I'd say Tim Anderson was one of the only people that you saw from 2016 to 2019 get so much better, specifically with his hitting. But 2019, the team showed significant promise, but still lost 17 more games than we won. But things are promising, and the rebuild seemed to be over. Connor, do you remember your thoughts going into this year?
Yeah, I know this was like a lot of this I feel like was really cool, especially Lucas Giolito, where I believe we had signed his like high school pitching coach or like his old pitching coach, and he had turned into, I think, like the White Sox like head pitching coach. And it seemed like he had found like this guru to go and fix his pitching for him, and he was like totally dealing. I feel like that was sick. Eloy coming in, I remember with those like red batting gloves. I distinctly remember I was listening to Steve Stone. We were playing the Twins, and I believe we had just like swept the Twins, and him distinctly saying something like, "For years, the Twins have owned the Sox, and it seems like at this point in our storyline, there's a changing guard." I don't know. I feel like this was really when we started to tap in with the Sox, and it started to be fun Sox again.
Yeah, and they were a cool team. We, as of 2020 to 2021, the average age of our pitching staff was 26, and we had big bruisers hitting the ball. I think I saw a thing that was like Abreu, Robert, Eloy, and Yohan were all over like six. I think they were all over like 6'2" and over 220. They were all like linebackers,
Beefcakes,
basically. Yeah, and we were an exciting team to root for. So that leads us into 2020. 2020 is the year rebuild's over. We're ready to go. We're ready to roll. And the preseason moves leading up to this year signified that. We signed Dallas Keuchel, who was a previous Cy Young winner, to a 3-year, $55 million contract. And we signed two-time All-Star Yasmani Grandal to a 4-year, $73 million contract, which at that time was the largest contract total money-wise in Sox history, which Shohei Ohtani just signed a 10-year, $700 million contract. And our biggest contract right now is the Andrew Benintendi contract, which is worth $75 million. So big teams sign big players for big money, and we should be one of those teams, but we just don't. We don't pay up. But we signed this great catcher. We signed this good pitcher. We extend Jose Abreu. We extend Tim Anderson, and then we extend Luis Robert. I believe, or we sign Robert for 6 more years. Like, we are securing the future. All good signs of a team that is ready to be built to last a long time. This is the season that was also cut short by COVID. We only ended up playing 60 games and we went 35-25, but that was good enough for us to make the playoffs, or I believe is the wild card. But Jose Abreu wins the AL MVP. Dallas Keuchel and Lucas Giolito both finished top 10 in Cy Young voting. So we make the playoffs, but then we end up losing to Oakland. I remember very distinctly against Liam Hendricks. Yeah, that was the first time I saw Liam Hendricks and him just absolutely piecing us up. But hope is in the air. First time we made the playoffs in 12 years. And people were excited for 2021 and the future for the White Sox. If you have anything, Connor, for that season, that COVID season. I remember distinctly watching games with you, Connor, after, during COVID. The Sox were the only exciting thing to watch.
Yeah, that was really fun. I remember like watching the games with the cardboard fans in the stands, and yeah, the Sox like were pretty hot and exciting. And Abreu's MVP season, I feel like, was so cool. Especially, I think he was like 30 when he won the MVP. He was definitely like older, and to see him win the AL MVP, I feel like was so cool. And I remember him getting the MVP. He was like crying when he was receiving the award with his family. I feel like that was really cool to see. I think we won one game maybe in the playoffs, but it was like, I think it was a best of 5, and yeah, it didn't go too well, but it was still an interesting season. I feel like that was when it was a fun season, I feel like, to watch.
Yeah, so Sox make the playoffs 2020, and we are an exciting team that I feel like any manager would have been excited to come in and lead. So 2021, we fire Rick Renteria, and to capitalize on all of the momentum that we have with this young and exciting team, we hire Tony La Russa. Kind of what were you going to say?
I was going to kind of hit on this. Yeah, just being like, at this point, Tim Anderson had really rebranded the Sox, I feel like, as being, the swag in baseball, or Tim Anderson was trying to bring swag back to baseball. And like what you're going to hit on, or like what we're talking about, I feel like we were the youngest team. We had all these swaggy players, like fun players, like, dancing around and like trying to bring excitement to the most boring professional sport that we have in the US. Like, and then to hire a guy like Tony La Russa, I feel like was like one of the biggest bag fumbles that we could have done.
Literally 200-mile-per-hour locomotive hitting a brick wall of the swag. So for context, Tony La Russa led the White Sox to the playoffs in the 80s. This dude is old.
40 years ago.
Yeah, 40 years ago. He was already in the Hall of Fame. That's insane.
Essentially, if we signed Mike Dick, I feel like, to coach the Bears, like,
I'm not sure 100% of this, but it seems like another result of Jerry Reinsdorf and his poor ownership. Yeah. Tony La Russa is one of his boys. I'm pretty sure Tony La Russa is the only manager that we even interviewed, was the only guy we even interviewed. Like, what an absolute joke. But 2021, it didn't really matter that we had Tony. His problems would only really come to light, I think, in 2022. Okay, so we hire Tony La Russa. Before the 2021 season, we add Liam Hendricks and Lance Lynn, both amazing pitchers. Liam Hendricks, if you remember, was the one who stripped us away of our playoff appearance in 2020. So it's like, now we got that guy. And now it's like, okay, now we just got 2 amazing pitchers. Now we're ready to go. Carney, you talked about how electric that Hendricks signing was, and
That was
how
so cool. Yeah.
just so much juice bringing into the team. God, I remember going to Sox games at this time and seeing when Hendricks would close. It was like the coolest. It was something exciting in a baseball game. Like, it was, the lights would go out, the lights would flash. He would play. I forgot what song he'd play, but he would just come out so amped.
The history of the Sox is like being very cheap. You're not really making these moves that you want. But then, like, to see us sign Hendricks and then Lynn, you're like, oh shoot, like we're really trying to do this now, or like we're really getting this going. Oh, yeah, he would always play We Will Rock You, I think. God, yeah, I feel like that was super exciting to see him sign. Yeah, especially after seeing him own us in the playoffs. I feel like I remember texting our friend Ryan how excited we were, and like, again, I feel like this podcast is highlighted by feelings of hope, but again, a feeling of hope.
If you guys have some free time, you guys should look up. I believe it was a Tim Anderson altercation he had with an umpire where I kind of forget what the scene was, but it leads to Tony La Russa shuffling out up to the umpire, and it is, a 78-year-old running out fast to home base, and it looks like his feet, both feet never leave the ground. It's just like he's both shoveling both feet, and he's just waddling. His arms don't move. It's literally just top half body stays completely still, just lower half just sliding, just gliding.
It's like if in Photoshop you grabbed him and dragged him across the screen literally without like moving him. Yeah.
Yeah. So 2021, Carlos Rodon and Lance Lynn go on to be top 5 in Cy Young voting. Rodon, Lance Lynn, Liam Hendricks, and Tim Anderson would all make the playoffs. Unheard of for the Sox to have that many players make the playoffs. Game, right? Sorry, make the All-Star game. Yeah. Yes, make the All-Star game. We didn't just send 4 people to the playoffs. That would have been a bad move.
Yeah, we would have lost every game.
We finished 93-69. We win the AL Central, but then we go on to lose 3-1 to the Astros, the ALDS. But this is a notable year because this is the first time in White Sox history that we make the playoffs in consecutive years, which, I mean, in and of itself is just an insane stat. We've never made the playoffs twice in a row. We did it for the first time in 2021, and we are a team that's over 100 years old. But this year, it's going to be a common thing, was still hopeful for the next year. We keep kicking the can down to say, okay, it wasn't this year, but it's going to be next year. I feel like we still kept thinking next year is our year. And 2022 is when the actual downfall of when the thing that's supposed to be good doesn't go well. Connor, you have anything else to add for 2021 before we move on to 2022?
No, yeah, I feel like for both the 2020 and 2021 season, I feel like we kept saying that the Sox were ahead of schedule. Very ahead of schedule, like being like kind of like making the playoffs, and what we do in the playoffs is gravy because we're kind of just expecting to show progress, and the fact that we made the playoffs is an achievement enough. So then you're always thinking like, yeah, next year is when we really buckle down. We'll really be on schedule, and I feel like that leads us to 2022 then.
Yeah, I remember distinctly after we lose to 2020 to the A's, looking at the Sports Center and someone talking about how great it is that we can get Robert and Eloy this young playoff experience at such a young age. Mm-hmm. And, now it looks like that's maybe the only playoff experience they'll get as White Sox. So this leads us to 2022, which is the start of the downfall of the White Sox. Going into 2022, we signed Joe Kelly, who famously did what was it? He did a crying face to Carlos Correa, right? Was that the thing that he did?
He did like a mopey face after striking him out. He did like a mopey face, yeah.
The core team, but the main point is the core team remains intact. We still had all of our main pieces, led obviously by Tim Anderson and Jose Abreu, but then also complemented with our young studs like Eloy. With Eloy and Robert, and then we still had this really, really impressive pitching staff with Hendricks, Lynn. 2022, Dylan Cease ends up being really good. We still had this core team, and all expectations were, okay, we're still like, if we were behind or ahead of schedule in 21 and 20, this was the year that we're supposed to make at least a deep-ish run into the playoffs. But that is not what happened. We have a poor start to the season. We go 8-13. And people start to look at Tony La Russa as the blame for some of our problems. So some of the notable points that we have for Tony La Russa, some of his worst parts to this season. He had a famous, or kind of, I'll let you hit on the Trey Turner intentional walk, but one thing that I distinctly remember was there was a clip of him falling asleep at a game in the dugout, which is something that, like you would see literally your grandpa when you were trying to watch a movie at night and he's falling asleep during the game. You're like, Dad, come on, wake up, watch the game. Or like falling asleep in church. It's literally like Tony La Russa's fighting, falling asleep in the game. Exactly. Tony would eventually go on to take medical leave for the season because of a pacemaker that he had in his heart. A pacemaker. This guy was an old man coaching our team. And then another bad thing that Tony would do constantly that I thought was funny someone brought up was he was constantly forcing Lurie Garcia into the lineup, who did was just not a very good player. And I found it funny that someone made a point to mention why he kept forcing this guy in. I remember watching games in 2022, just seeing this guy and thinking like, who is this? Why do we keep having him? He'd always be at the bottom of the lineup and just hanging out there. When we had pretty good draft picks like Jake Berger and Andrew Vaughn, that Jake Berger would go on to be a pretty good hitter, and Andrew Vaughn until 2024 was, pretty decent hitter. This is just strange. But Connor, I'll let you talk about the Trey Turner fiasco.
We're playing the Dodgers. Freddie Freeman is on second base. We get Trey Turner to a 1-2 count, and you're thinking, here we go. The chance to strike out Trey Turner.
That is one ball, 2 strikes, right?
Yes, correct. So in baseball, it's only 3 strikes to get a guy out, right?
You only need one more strike.
Exactly, yeah. But no. Tony La Russa decides to intentionally walk Trey Turner to allow him to reach first base instead of trying to pitch at him. And you could see the look on Freddie Freeman's face when he is trying to explain, and Danny Mendrick standing next to him trying to explain Tony La Russa's decision, and Freddie Freeman and keep a straight face at that. So yeah, we walked the guy on a 1-2 count. This ended up with then the post-game interview was hilarious. Tony La Russa. His question was, why did you walk Trey Turner on a 1-2 count? Like, people upset about the decision, and they're like, yes. And he's like, of course. Let me ask you a question. Do you know Trey Turner's 1-2 count? And the reporter, of course, says, no, I don't know what that is. And he says, yeah, that's what I thought. And then, doesn't say what he is, but he's like, Trey Turner on a lefty 1-2 count. And you don't want to take that. There's been red flags for a long time, but I feel like this was a serious red flag for Tony time.
Some of you may be asking, did that decision work out? Was that a good decision? So it's I'm pretty sure it's 5-7 Dodgers. We walk Trey Turner. There's a guy in third. So now there's a guy in third and first and third. Next guy hits a home run, 3-1 homer. Now it's 10-5. And, Sox end up losing that game. I saw someone talk about Tony La Russa in the 80s, I think was unique for his unique coaching style that worked in the 80s before there was this huge analytic shift in the league, which is ironic because he somehow, for some reason, knew the analytics of Trey Turner's 1-2 count, batting average or whatever. But he had he's still so clearly stuck in his old ways of 80s baseball and doesn't really understand new statistics. I don't even know if it's understand new statistics. It's just like, even I feel like I understand that if you're at 1-2, you're not doing good as a batter. I'm choking up on the bat, I'm just going for contact. Yeah, this was, I feel like, a clear sign that Tony La Russa was behind the times, which was frightening because of our young team that had a kind of a window of winning right now. And now we've got this guy leading us that doesn't seem to be all up there at the table playing. He's not playing with a full deck. He's missing some of the big cards, the important cards. He's missing some
it was strange with baseball being such an analytical sport that a guy who probably couldn't figure out, 2-step verification to log into his Facebook account was running our franchise. So it was very alarming. And I feel like it's any franchise where it's the thing is fine. You can have incompetencies somewhere if the whole team is doing well. But then once the team starts falling apart, these things become so painfully obvious. That's I feel like teams are competent until they're not. And then you notice everything that's wrong with them. And I feel like that was the Tony La Russa era in a nutshell.
100%. So following the terrible Tony catastrophes, we I mean, just in general for the season. Spoiler: we go 81 and 81. We go dead 500, and we had crazy losing streaks throughout this season. So we had an 8-game losing streak to start the season, and then every time we're like climbing back up, and we're like, okay, here we go. Now we're back. We like slam right back down. In August, we go, after gaining some momentum, we end up losing 10 out of the next 12 games. And then mid September, we start climbing back up, and then we go on an 8-game losing streak. These losing streaks, we ended up going 2-26. So 2-26, if we had won, I don't know, 8 or 10 more games out of that, if we had just done 50-50 those games, we would have easily had over 90 wins and would have made the playoffs. But we go 81 and 81, and then we missed the playoffs. The only highlights from the 2022 season, Jose Abreu still did really good, and Dylan Cease had his first, I think, breakout season. He was, I think, maybe top 5 in Cy Young voting. He had an awesome season. Cease in 2022 had a 2.2 ERA. So he was slinging it. He was dishing them. But overall, 2022 was just a huge question mark of what the heck happened. Like, this was the year we were supposed to be awesome. We had all of our players, we were ready to go, and we just, wet noodled the whole season. And we kind of thought, okay, well, now we just got to scratch it, move on to 2023 and see what happens. Connie, have anything else to add for 2022?
No, we can move on. I feel like it was just, it's the idea that you kind of see the rebuild rise and fall. And I feel like this is the first time that I became truly a disgruntled fan where, like, I know Dad doesn't believe that any Chicago sports team can be good because he's witnessed it happen before. And I feel like this was the first time where you notice, like, man, we saw the start of this rebuild and now we're looking at the end of this rebuild.
Yeah, and just real quick, in 2020, the teams like I have it marked here. The teams that made the playoffs in 2020, like the Astros, the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Rays, and the Brewers, for after 2020, every year we're still making deep playoff runs. And already 2 years after our playoff appearance, we've already given up and have stopped being threats in playoff contenders. And like you said, Connor, was the first time that you kind of started to get worried that was our contention window 2 years. Was that it?
Yeah.
But going to 2023, we fired Tony La Russa after his pacemaker incident. Sox and Tony split, and we hire Pedro Grifol, who was a young manager with no coaching experience before. I mean, like, polar opposite of Tony La Russa, complete opposite. And it's supposed to bring some young energy, some excitement into the club. We get rid of Jose Abreu. He goes to the Astros, and we sign Andrew Benintendi, who, callback 2017 #1 prospect. We go out and get him in 2023 when he's no longer very good, and we sign him to 5 years, $75 million, largest contract in White Sox history. Still hoping that he could
skadoosh.
Yeah, get back to his 2017 days. And this 2023 was an absolute pathetic season. We end up going 61 and 101. This was the worst season we had since 1970. We had the third lowest on-base percentage in the league. Tim Anderson absolutely falls apart. He ends up with a 245 batting average. He had the lowest OPS, which is on-base percentage plus slugging, in the league. And in one game, he got knocked out by Jose Ramirez, which was just like such a good summary. If you want to summarize the White Sox 2023, you just watch that clip. Tim Anderson, who was the face of the White Sox for so many years, just get knocked out in front of everyone.
Yeah, Jose Ramirez, who owns us every year, just like knocking our champion down. That was tough.
Yeah. Like, I think Tim started the fight. I mean, like, I watched the clip. Ramirez gets in his face, but then I think Tim puts his hands up first and then gets knocked out. A tough look. Our pitching staff falls apart. We have the most home runs given up in the league. We have the third worst ERA. Dylan Cease seems to reveal that his 2022 experiment was just a one-time thing. He finishes with a 4.58 ERA, coming off of his 2.2 ERA. 2023, pathetic year. Everything falls apart. So at the trade deadline, what do? Okay, we trade Keenan Middleton. We trade him to the Yankees, send him to the Yankees. We trade Lance Lynn to the Dodgers, and we get rid of, painfully, Lucas Giolito, which I think is such a good indication of rebuild is over, because, one of our hot prospects for the rebuild, we're already trading him to the Angels. Connor, I'll let you hit on those things. I'll let you hit on those things real quick, but I just wanted to highlight Keaton Middleton, the guy who traded to the Yankees, would later come out and say a lot of negative stuff about the White Sox and how under Tony and Grifol, there are basically no rules or accountability in the staff, in the clubhouse, just everyone running around doing whatever they want. There's no discipline, which, it's just disappointing to see when you have such a young team, and I feel like you need that in the clubhouse.
No, I don't have a whole lot to say here, but yeah, I feel like the Lucas Giolito, and to be fair, Lucas Giolito has not been great since the Sox have gotten rid of him. I'm not 100% sure how Lance Lynn has been, but just seeing Lucas Giolito leave, I feel like was very tough. Or just anytime you're trading these guys who you've seen since prospects, I feel like it's tough to see. And yeah, you just realize that like the hope that we had is now been depleted. All the prospects that we were supposed to bring up, almost none of them panned out, and now we're kind of just left with a bad team, not a lot of trade capital, and a depleted farm system, which is like a very, very tough spot to be.
So 2023 is the realization that, okay, the Sox, it was actually a smoke and mirrors trick of 2020. In 2021, we didn't actually know that was the best we were going to have it for the foreseeable future. Because that leads us now to current state of the White Sox, where as of this recording, 2024, we are 15-38. We started the season with a rockin' 3-15, and it seemed like, that was one of the worst starts in MLB history. We get rid of Tim Anderson, send him to the Marlins, get rid of Dylan Cease to the Padres. Another thing that's just like, well, there goes the team, getting rid of Tim Anderson. And then Dylan Cease, our young pitcher that we send to the Padres, is just another rough thing. This year we have persistent injuries with Yohan Moncada, who I swear I feel like Yohan is injured more than he's plays. Eloy Jimenez is
that long COVID.
Eloy is always injured, and anytime he gets injured for the dumbest reasons. I remember he tore his pec from trying to snag a home run. There's so many injuries where they just like him and Robert just like fall running to first.
Into the wall,
They're like run into the wall. There's like such a big lumbering guy that he just keeps injuring himself. Poor performances from Andrew Vaughn and Andrew Benintendi. Andrew Vaughn has one of the worst WAR in the MLB. Or for the uninitiated is the wins above replacement, which is basically if you took Andrew Vaughn and subbed out a average MLB player, how many more games would we win with Andrew Vaughn? So, you want, I think like Mike Trout's got like a career WAR of like over 100, right? Because he's really, really good, but Vaughn stinks. Connor, I'll let you cover some other 2024 vibes, and then I'm just going to hit on some of these metrics that really show how bad we are.
I feel like I think the one thing that I just want to say is like kind of leading up to the season. One, I think that the canary in the coal mine was when Jason Benetti signed a contract with the Tigers. Like how cheap are we that we can't sign Jason Benetti, who is like a great sportscaster, and I love Jason Benetti. I feel like he's a great he's super talented, sure, but like we really don't have the money to retain our sportscaster. Like that's how much we respect the fans and like how much we respect this franchise. Like how embarrassing is it that we like literally our announcer signs with another AL Central team? That's like so embarrassing. Really marked a bad time for the Sox, and I feel like it just played out in this season.
So here's some quick stats to highlight the depressing 2024 season that the White Sox are on. God, this morning I was watching a video that was just talking about the general state of the MLB, and it starts by talking about how much of an anomaly the terribleness of the White Sox is this season. It was unbelievable. So we are, at the time of that video, that's where I got a lot of these stats from. We were last in batting average, on-base percentage, slugging percentage. We had the least runs scored, the least home runs, and the least amount of hits in the MLB. So,
you need those hits, man. You need those hits in baseball.
Yeah, runs scored, home runs, hits, slugging percentage, on-base percentage, batting average. There's not that many more stats that I can honestly name in hitting and we're last in all of them. We had
I'll say
the
runs scored. Yeah, runs scored. That's probably the most important one.
yeah, I mean yeah. 2023. Okay, so our OPS. Some of you are thinking, oh, maybe we had a good OPS. No, we did not. So 2023.
Who's thinking that?
2023, if you guys remember, I said Tim Anderson had the worst OPS in the league. Remember, Tim Anderson previously won the batting title. He had a 582 OPS. So 582 was the worst out of every single player in the MLB. Think of how many players in the MLB. There's 30 teams, X amount of players on each team. Okay, 2024, our OPS was 592. So, like, imagine all 9 players in our starting lineup are essentially the worst batters in the league, right? Like our whole lineup is hitting 592. That's really bad, really bad. We stunk. As of April 22nd, we were shut out in 36% of our games. That was a baseball first time that's ever happened. 36% of our games. We were projected to have the worst record since the 1899 Cleveland Spiders, who are not a team anymore. I didn't even know the Cleveland Spiders were a team. Some of these stats were insane. The Spiders were so bad they averaged 199 fans a game, which I mean is so funny. And they were so bad that the league forced the Spiders to play their home games at away game stadiums so more fans would show up because nobody wanted to go to a Cleveland Spiders game, and we are projected to be worse than that team. Oh my god. Have you seen Connor? There is a famous clip of a guy on a Chicago sports radio show who calls in to dish out a 7-minute rant on the White Sox. Have you seen that?
Yes. And they, not God. Recently, but I remember watching it when it came out. Yeah. Or you can hit on it.
Oh my God. You know, he talks about it's 7 minutes uninterrupted. The two hosts just let him go for 7 minutes, and he just up and down shreds the White Sox, talks about Tony La Russa, talks about, I didn't even hit on, we signed Mike Clevenger, who has had a smattering of domestic abuse cases on his wife and his children, I think, or his child. Real garbage person, garbage trash person, and hits on him, hits on the poor management, hits on this rebuilding that we've had led by the two I forget what they're called in baseball, but basically like our GM and the people making the signing decisions, just how much they have failed us, and just the failures of Jerry Reinsdorf, of just everything that is wrong with the Sox. He hits on Andrew Benintendi being our highest paid player at $75 million. Just hits on it's just a pretty funny thing to listen to.
Just to throw a couple things out, Shohei Ohtani, who currently does have the second highest OPS in baseball, but his OPS is 1.024. So it's over 1,000. So kind of just to put into perspective how bad 592 is. We are really bad. Also, I think it's funny. Sports teams need to start naming their teams after bugs again. I think spiders is a really cool name. We need to have the insects come back and start, disrupting the league. I know the Richmond Spiders are still out there making some noise in March Madness, but I think the Spiders need a resurgence.
We need inanimate objects, animals. Very inoffensive names.
Well, we're already the White Sox, so I think inanimate.
That's pretty safe, yeah. So looking forward, now this is the most depressing part of the podcast. What's to come? So typically in this scenario, a team that is projected to have the worst record in baseball since 1899 and previously had 101 losses, worst record since 1970. A team like that is supposed to be in a rebuilding phase where they have a developed farm system or something to look forward to, but that's not the case for the Sox. We currently have the 20th ranked farm system. We only have 2 top 100 prospects. One guy named Colson Montgomery and another guy named Noah Schultz. I mean, both these guys are probably younger than us, which I think is funny, but our only real asset is Luis Robert. So we have nothing compared to 2016 where we had Quintana, Chris Sale, and Eaton, where we had a lot of trade pieces. We've got none of that right now. We have a terrible farm system, not a lot of trade pieces. Connor has in his notes talks about the draft pick situation.
So you look at this and you think, okay, worst team in baseball, worst team since the Cleveland Spiders. Thankfully, we can be redeemed by the number one pick in the draft. You know, the Spiders probably got the number one pick in the draft and drafted somebody great, but no. The White Sox, because we do not participate in the money sharing part of the league, we do not have a top 10 pick this year because we picked in the top 10 last year. So we are going to have the worst record in baseball and pick at the 11th pick in the draft and draft like another pitcher from Vanderbilt who's not going to like pan out and do well. So, our farm system sucks besides that. So yeah, it's kind of like we're just like in the rudder right now. Maybe the MLB will remove that rule about the top 10 picks in 2 years to help the Sox out, but it seems like we're entering our spider era right now and we can't really figure out what's going on.
Colson Montgomery's 22, Noah Schultz is 20. Yeah, you would say right now Sox are stuck, destined to be bad for a while. And it's ironic that I didn't know that large market rule. It's funny that we're considered a large market team when our highest contract is worth almost as much as Shohei makes in a single year. And it's funny that they have that rule at the top 10 picks, but then they don't put a salary cap in the MLB. So I don't know. So I'm sorry to end this podcast on a depressing note, but that is the current state of the Chicago White Sox. What happened? I think it's a product of poor ownership. Signing of Tony La Russa was a bad move. I think a lot of the prospects that we had that came up in the league were not developed properly or didn't improve once they got in the league. Yohan Moncada was a huge bust. It was very disappointing. Eloy has been riddled with injuries. Robert has had a ton of injuries. Tim Anderson was great. Tim Anderson and Abreu were awesome. They worked out well. But most of our other hot prospects, like Kopech, hasn't been great. None of our prospects developed once they got into the league and once they moved on. So what needs to change? I think probably Reinsdorf needs to sell the team as a start and new management, and we're going to have to be bad for a long time. I think it was nice to talk about the Sox. This might be probably going to go back to the Bears next episode because they're more fun to talk about. But I still think this was an enlightening thing. I enjoyed researching the Sox and talking about something other than football. But if you got nothing else to add, Connor, I won't quiz you on colleges
MLB
of baseball players. I'd imagine that'd be much harder. But that'll do it for today's episode of the Chicagolandians. If you made it to the end of this episode, thank you as always for being a loyal listener. Shout out to our mom who always listens to every episode. Love you so very much.
Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom, for supporting us. If you guys like this episode, you can follow us on Twitter or X at Chicagolandians. You can follow us on YouTube and keep your eyes out for other social medias. We also have TikTok. So you can follow us at TikTok at Chicagolandians. We're going to start posting more shorts. But that'll do it for today's episode. I guess we usually end it with bear down. I think we're still going to do that because Sox aren't something to write home about. So
don't deserve it.
Don't deserve it. So as always, thank you for listening and bear down.
Bear down, baby.
Woo.